So first of all, this is the inflation over the last 10 years. Just so you know, the average inflation over like the US's history is about 3%. Over the last 10 years, the average inflation was also about 3%. Now we did have a couple years of very high inflation, one about 5%, two about 4 to 5%, and then one of about 8%. But over the 10-year span, it was really average inflation. It wasn't anything super out of the norm or out of the ordinary, which maybe is unpopular to say because we all want to say inflation is horrible, inflation is terrible. We're all dying of inflation every day. And don't get me wrong, inflation does have a lot of bad side effects, but actually the inflation that we experienced is perfectly within normal. While those were outlier high levels of inflation, we'll go into why we had that high inflation. And we'll also it's also worth noting that even though they were outlier high inflation, over a 10-year span, they kind of averaged out because we had some very low inflation during that 10 years too. So it was building up, and I think I know why, and I'm going to try to make that explanation when we get there. So, um, lots to say about this slide. So these are the key drivers of inflation. So one is the COVID-19 pandemic. So there were a lot of supply chain bottlenecks. For those that didn't remember, the Panama Canal had a big backlog of people trying to get through it. There were like backlogs of people trying to get through naval, like sea passages all over the world. So there were a lot of supply chain problems, and that led to a shortage of goods and supplies. And for those that aren't familiar with supply and demand, if you have lots more stuff, then the things get cheaper because there's plenty of it. If you don't have enough, then it gets more expensive because there's a limited supply, so people pay higher prices. And I think I'm gonna go into that in a little more detail later on. But I'm not going doing like an Econ 101, although as I did this presentation, Alan, you mentioned you're interested in economics. I actually realized I need to do like an econ primer. I took in TA'd, not TA'd, but I took and got A's in micro and macro at beginner and intermediate levels in my school. So I have a little bit of background in that, and I would love to teach what I learned because it is very interesting. And I think you'll hopefully learn a little bit tonight, but there's hopefully more to come when calendars permit. So the second thing is fiscal and monetary stimulus. Now, this is the one area that I'll disagree a little bit with ChatGPT. It says that it was related to the pandemic and the fiscal and monetary stimulus that was implemented from the pandemic. It does not mention pre-pandemic monetary stimulus. And that's what I'm going to talk about tonight that I think is pretty unique. And I don't see anyone even in the media talking about this, although I don't watch a lot of news, I'll be honest, but I also don't hear about it from my friends that share lots of news with me. And so I think it'll be actually my own hypothesis here, as far as I know. I'm sure other people have said it before, but I think that making the argument in the way that I am tonight will be sort of news for a lot of people and hopefully useful. The basically the stimulation of the monetary stimulus that came with the COVID-19 pandemic also created an influx of money. And remember, if there's more of something, it's less valuable. And so if there's more money in the economy, it becomes less valuable. And we will definitely talk about that tonight in more detail. The next thing is rising commodity prices. And basically, in the energy sector, there was a big increase in commodity prices, and transportation and manufacturing also had price increases, which led to consumer prices going up as well. Because when transportation, manufacturing, and energy all cost more, what do companies do? They raise the prices to cover those costs and make sure that they stay profitable, or as profitable as they are. Labor market dynamics is about tight labor markets, which led to wage increases, which then have been passed on to consumers through higher prices, you guessed it, for goods and services. Because if you pay your employees more, then most companies will just increase prices rather than take a lower margin for themselves. We've talked in the past about generous capitalism, where a different response may be appropriate in that case for a generous capitalist business. But most businesses are not generous capitalist businesses. If you want to learn more about that, check out Generous Capitalism on our YouTube channel. We have a video for that. So, trade policies, the implementation of tariffs on various goods have increased import costs, and that contributed to higher prices for consumers. And if you didn't come to our meeting on tariffs, that should also be up on YouTube relatively soon, if not yet, in the next week or two, probably. And then the last one is corporate pricing strategies. So some companies have increased prices beyond the cost of inflation because and used inflation as the reason for increasing prices, and this is known as greedflation. And um, basically, that contributed to periods of increased inflation over the past decade. And while those things are true, I will say an example of that is a major household name, McDonald's, actually increased their prices by over 100% from the news article that I read because of supposedly inflation, which was 8%, as you saw. Now, maybe McDonald's ingredients had a little more inflation than the average inflation of the CPI, but probably not that much higher. So, and in fact, other fast food companies didn't increase prices nearly as much. So that's an example of greedflation. Now, I'm going to dig into um, that and say it's not just from the that the other thing is that I'm going to dig into the monetary policy and say that it's not just from the pandemic, it's going back to the financial crisis of 2008. And I think I have a pretty good argument that that's actually the biggest influence on inflation compared to the other areas that GPT talks about. And I'll try to make a good logical argument for that, as I always try to do. And you guys can ask me questions in the Q&A to see whether or not it's solid. I always like for people to kick the tires on my arguments. That's a way of, seeking truth together, which we like to do in the FTI. Um, and like I mentioned earlier when there were less people, but I'll say it again. This is probably the first time that I've had GPT come up with an answer that I think was not like more correct than it was incorrect. And it's about a very specific topic that is also politically charged. So it's possible that that's the reason, and it's possible that people just haven't noticed the real reason because I think it intentionally has flown under the radar screen. And I think that when I explain what it is and why, I think you'll understand why it might have flown under the radar screen. So let's understand quantitative easing. You can guess where I'm going with my argument here. So, a treasury bond is an agreement from the U.S. government, and I learned more about this while researching for this event. Basically, the way that well, let me explain what a treasury bond is. It's basically an agreement from the U.S. government to pay money back that was purchased for plus interest over a certain time period. It could be 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. And treasury bonds are considered the safest investment, but it's also one of the lowest return investments that you can make. So banks buy treasury bonds from the federal government, sometimes at a discount and sometimes at a surplus. I could not find data on whether or not they're typically bought at a surplus or discount over the last 20 years, unfortunately, which is unfortunate because I have a hypothesis that they were largely bought at a discount. And I didn't have an easy way to investigate that further. If anyone does, connect with me offline. I'll put my email in the chat because we have more people now. Um, 1 second. There we go. And so and by the way, I don't see the chat when I'm presenting. So if you have a something that's really urgent, like someone is being disruptive in the chat or something like that, raise your hand. And that actually reminds me, I did not do my typical. I need to take a quick break because we do get Zoom bombers here, and I need to do what's called. Bear with me 1 second. I gotta make us more resilient in case Zoom bombers come. Forgot to do that when we were in the beginning. Um, Usually they will have already shown themselves by now, so I think we're okay, but I still don't want to be extra vulnerable. And this. So, all right. So that's the most urgent stuff. So let's go back to treasury bonds, right? It's basically an agreement where the company, the bank, buys a bond from the government. The government says they'll pay back that bond plus interest at the end of the time period. Now, what that does is it takes the bank's money and it takes it out of the money supply because the bank can't, um, use that money to lend to consumers at that time. So, what that does is it means there's less money in the money supply when the bank buys the bond. Now, what QE is the government buying those treasury bonds back before they're due. So basically, money that was supposed to be out of the money supply for a period of time is coming back into the money supply. So it's not per se like a free loan or anything like that, which is how I originally thought of it, to be honest, until I researched it more carefully. But it's really just a movement of money that's out of the money supply and putting it back into the money supply earlier. Now, that does have a big impact though, because when that money comes into the money supply under a bank, and this is where I need to go into a mini economic course on the fractional reserve system, because this part may not make sense to you, but when you put money back into the money supply by giving it to banks, more money goes into the money supply than is given to the bank because they can lend out more money than they have, which may seem weird, but that's actually how the fractional reserve system works, and all banking systems internationally work that way. There's no one on what's called the gold standard, which we'll go into in a minute. Basically, that's that. And next slide. So, this is the thing that I found was interesting that no one's really talking about. In 2008, what the money supply, which is the amount of money in currency in circulation, the amount of US currency internationally, basically in circulation, was $7.5 trillion dollars. And the Federal Reserve had $0.9 trillion dollars that they had put into the um the that out of that 7.5, point 0.9 came from the Federal Reserve, where they had basically put money into the economy to stimulate it. Now, in 2022, there was almost three times as much money, actually 7, 14, 21. Yeah, almost three times as much money in the money supply, as there was in 2008. That is a lot more than would be there just from inflation. And I'll go into the comparison in a little bit. And so what that means is that, by the way, half of that increase in money supply was natural, and money supply does naturally increase because of the macroeconomic cycle of banks lending money to people, people then making money in the economy, and then depositing money into banks, which banks can then loan more money on. And that's where there's this very interesting cycle where money supply, is always going up slowly, and that's why there's always going to be inflation with with a a fractional reserve system. But by the way, if there are questions, just write them down and I will get to them. I forgot to say, by popular demand, people have asked to go through the whole presentation before we take questions. I used to take them along the way, but it kind of distracted people. So definitely write down questions. I love questions, and we'll get to them for sure. Um, so half of this money was put into the economy by quantitative easing, where they sort of artificially put more money into uh, the 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 economy than was going to be there otherwise, by to the tune of $9 trillion. And we'll talk about which Federal Reserve heads did that later on too. But basically, the last country to have what's called the gold standard, which means that they don't work on this fractional reserve system where money supply just naturally goes up over time, was Switzerland, and they left the gold standard in 1999. The BRICS countries are actually talking about bringing back a gold standard currency, which would be very interesting and a big threat to the U.S. The U.S. dollar as a reserve currency, which we could talk about another night if it interests people. And sorry if some of that didn't make sense. If it didn't and you want to learn more about it, just ask me in the Q&A to set up another event on it, or we'll get to it if we run out of questions. Um, so let's look at the Fed chair balance sheet. Um, oh, um, so okay, so this is not super easy to read probably because it's probably small for you, but basically the QE program is determined by the Fed chairman, which is supposed to be a non-political unit. But as you'll see, I think there might have been some political something involved in this because there was very much a party lines difference between who was adding to the currency, the money supply, and who was not. So Ben Bernanke was a Republican appointee, and under him, the balance sheet from the Fed, the amount of currency that went into circulation, went from zero point 0.8 to $4.5 trillion dollars. Under Janet Yellen, who was appointed by Barack Obama, it went from 4.5 trillion from 2014 to 2018 to 4.4 trillion. You'll notice that this is not aligned with who the president is because it's supposed to be a non-political appointment. But Jerome Powell, who was appointed by Trump, went from 4.4 trillion up to 8.5 trillion by 2022. So you can see it was very much party lines. Almost all the money supply increase was under Republican appointees. Um, the laws of supply and demand. So I mentioned this a little bit, but I'm going to go into it in a little more detail. If you have something that's scarce, like gold, it's generally very expensive if it has some useful practical purpose. If you have something that's super common, like soil, it's very cheap. There's soil all over the world, and both gold and soil are useful. You can grow food in soil. It's very useful, but there's so much soil that a pound of soil is not really worth that much, whereas a pound of gold is worth a whole heck of a lot. Gold's biggest reason for being valuable is actually in its scarcity, not just its utility, although it is also very useful. So scarce things are worth more money, and the same is true for money. So if there was only $7.5 trillion dollars worth of US money in the supply, then it has a certain value. If you triple the amount of it, it's going to become less valuable. And so we're going to take a closer look at that. So remember that the money supply since 2008 has tripled. So if you look at the value of $100 in 2008, when you account for inflation, that $100 of 2008 dollars would now be worth $147, which basically means your $100 in 2008 will buy about the same amount of stuff as 148. Um, sorry, you're not on mute. Sorry, I muted you. Um, will buy about the same amount of stuff as $147 will buy today because of the 3% annual inflation. Now it went up by $47, but it didn't go up by 3x, right? Whereas really the money in the circulation went up by 3x. So, but inflation only went up by 47%. Why is it that inflation didn't go up relatively commensurate with the money supply, right? Well, let's look into that in a little more detail. So, um, now that we know there's more money in the economy, which means that lending institutions can lend more money, let's see who they lent to. And this took some analysis on my own. This is not something that was commonly found. But what I found is that three-quarters of household debt is owned by the top 40% of the income distribution, whereas less than 10% is owned by the bottom 40%. So to get a little more detail, the top 20% of income uh, households own about 50% of debt. So if you're looking at who is taking on the additional amount of debt, and by the way, I think I skipped a step here. Let me try to fill it in. When more money comes into the economy, the way that it comes in is that money gets given to the banks early, and so the banks have more money in their reserves, is what it's called. What that means is when the bank has more money in their reserves, they can lend out more money. So the way that this quantitative easing stimulates the economy is through lending. Well, when we look at who the money was lent to, over 50% of debt is owned by the top 20% of income holders. And the top 40% of income holders hold 75% of total household debt. The bottom 40% hold less than 10% of household debt. So where did the money go? It went to top income earners. So interesting, right? So that actually is something that I hypothesized, but didn't actually, I wasn't able to totally logically defend until I did the analysis for preparing for this presentation. And so what that means is that most of the money went to the wealthiest people. And what happens when you give money to wealthy people is we don't buy more eggs and we don't buy more flour and we don't buy more chicken, right? Wealthy people buy a new Ferrari or, a new car or, something that's not necessarily making a big contribution to the CPI or the inflation index, the consumer shoot, now I'm blanking, but it's basically the to inflation. The way that inflation is calculated is by taking a normal basket of goods that the average consumer buys, and when those prices go up, the inflation goes up. Well, if the money is going to people who don't buy more of those average, types of goods and services, then inflation doesn't go up. And I was wondering before inflation started going up, I was like, with all this quantitative easing, why is it that inflation isn't going up? And I racked my brain around it, and the only thing I could come up with is that the money must be going to wealthy people because wealthy people don't buy more of the things that increase the inflation index. And when I actually did the research, it turned out that was true. So um, the truth is that when inflation went up is when that money eventually got to the lower income folks who actually did purchase more necessities. And this is where I like to, if I can take a quick aside, I like to joke that trickle down economics is not really a good policy. What we should have is trickle up economics, which is instead of giving the money to the people who don't need it and hoping that it'll trickle down to the people who do, why not just give the money directly to the people who need it and then they'll spend it in the economy and the money will trickle up to the wealthy eventually because if they're adding value to society and creating good products and services, then the average person will want to buy from them. So, actually trickle up economics makes a whole heck of a lot more sense than trickle down economics. Um, but another thing that's a funny fact about that is trickle down economics was actually a pejorative term used in the Reagan administration about his economic policies. It's actually more commonly called supply side economics, which is not nearly as descriptive, but it's no more sensical than under a different name. So I have said, and I'll say it again, and this is really the bottom line of this slide. There is a class war going on, and if you're not seeing it, you got to look more carefully because what we're dealing with in not only America, but all around the world is a class war. And the political divisions that politicians are sowing amongst us all to get us to fight red versus blue, it's all to keep you away from the class war. And there is definitely a class war going on. Although I will give a little bit of good news that even though there is a class war going on, there has been progress made, and I'll get to that at the end. But I will say that even though there has been a little bit of progress, the lion's share of economic growth goes to the wealthiest of the wealthy. And so I'm going to show you a little bit more about what this looks like. And what this graph is it's showing the top 10% of income earners, and I'm going to put my mouse over here. This this shade of green is the percentage of wealth distribution owned by the top 10% of wealth earners. And you'll notice that's way bigger than the combination of the other 90%. So that's the class war that I'm talking about, that the top 10% own probably 3x of what the other 90% of Americans own in terms of net income. Now, if you look at the 50th to 90th percentile, well, they're the middle class. And they do, have some significant wealth, but I will say under Bush, it went way down. And so under Bush, when Bush started his term, the middle class had over 30% of wealth. and then it went down to, under 30%. And then the bottom 50% basically went from 1.8% to 0.6% during George Bush's presidency. Um, well, let me actually go. Um, I'm going to go by starting from the bottom 50%. So under Bush, it went from 1.8% to 0.6%. Under Barack Obama, it rose from 1% to, I'm sorry, it increased modestly to 1.1% from 0.6% under Barack Obama. And then I'm going to give kudos to Donald Trump. I don't even know if he knows he did this, but the bottom 50% went from 1% to 2% under Donald Trump, which I found fascinating. I did not dig into like why that happened, which I would be interested to do because I don't know if that was intentional or not, but I will give him credit for it because it did happen under his watch. And so I found that interesting. And then it continued to grow to 2.4% under Joe Biden. And we'll see what happens over the next 4 years. The 50th tonight, when he can't be reelected again, at least not democratically. Um, and then the 50th to 90th percentile went from 35.9% to 26% during George Bush's term, and then further decreased under Barack Obama to 22.5%. And then it remained relatively stable under Donald Trump's presidency. And then it was estimated at 22.5% under Joe Biden. And then the top 10% saw their share increase under George Bush. Of course, the other two decreased, so this one had to go up. It went from 62.3% to 73.4%. And then it continued to rise under Barack Obama up to 77.1%. And then it slightly decreased under Donald Trump, which I found interesting. The one thing that I do have to say that I do know about Donald Trump is he gave tax cuts to everybody when we have a huge deficit and a huge amount of debt. And the tax cuts for everybody but the wealthiest will all expire, and the tax cuts for the wealthiest do not expire. So that was one thing that he snuck through there that I don't know if people are thinking about in the long term, because usually by the time those things expire, everyone's forgotten about who made them happen, but it will hit the lower and middle incomes hard when it expires. But the next thing is for the top 10%, it was estimated at 75.1%. So it it went so it decreased from 77.1% down to 76.1% under Obama. And then Donald Trump's term, it was estimated at, or sorry, it decreased to 76.1% under Donald Trump's term. And then it was estimated at 75.1%. So it went down further under Joe Biden. So it basically shows that, all the money's going to the top 10%, folks. And guess what? Historically speaking, the only people that mattered even before Citizens United said you're allowed to buy political power, the only people that mattered in votes were the top 10%. And so look, we have very clearly whose opinions matter. It's the top 10%. Who has all the money? It's the top 10%. And what did we do? We legalized money basically buying political power. And you even saw some attempts to buy votes in the last election, which I won't go into in detail. So next, future inflation outlook. And this is my last slide. I kept it to about 30 minutes. So I predict that if we continue with quantitative easing, we will have more inflation. And it seems likely that that's going to happen under Powell because I believe Trump appointed Powell. And so I predict that even though Trump said there won't be inflation, to be honest, if you fact check Trump, usually what he says is what's not going to be true. So if he says there's not going to be inflation, chances are good there will be inflation. And I think that that's probably going to be the case because the quantitative easing was highest under Republican appointees to the Fed. And so I predict that Trump will or Powell will continue quantitative easing to improve the economy, even though the economy is already doing fairly well. In a lot of ways, there are some slowdowns, and I think that whether you look at it one way or the other, that quantitative easing is going to happen. And whether that inflation hits us during Trump's tenure, not sure about that, right? Because if the quantitative easing continues to go to the top 10%, well, you saw how much wealth the top 10% have. We're not buying more eggs because of having more money. I buy all the eggs I want, and when I want eggs, I buy eggs. I don't care if it's $7, right? Now, unfortunately, for a lot of people, they're not buying eggs right now because eggs are so expensive. And that doesn't feel fair to me. And remember, the first intention of the Free Thinker Institute is to be the best version of ourselves, to seek truth, and to be fair. And for those of you saying, but Garrett, if you're saying you're in the top 10%, how is that fair? Well, I've spent my life savings to build a company that practices generous capitalism. And if you think that I'm not being fair, first watch the presentation on generous capitalism and then come back to me. So that said, I'm going to now give it to Margot to give a quick public service announcement about our Q&A portion, and feel free to raise your hands if you have questions or comments. And Margot, take it away.
Thank you, Garrett. Hello, everyone. So tonight I'm organized. It's the second time that I have done that. So I'm going to put in the chat the disclaimer so you can follow it. Yes, but I'm still going to read it. No, there are too much words. Okay, second attempt. No worries. I'm going to read it anyway. Welcome and thank you for being there. To ensure a smooth and inclusive discussion, please keep your contributions concise, aim for 2 minutes, with the replies under 30 seconds. If a back-to-back discussion arise, we'll limit it to about 5 minutes to give everyone a fair chance to speak. So today I came with some color code. 2 minutes is green, 4 minutes is yellow, and 5 minutes is red, so I don't have to interrupt you to do so. I'm Margot Sergent, your friendly timekeeper, yes, with a French accent. I offer gentle reminders with color codes. Our goal is to create a space where all voices, introverts, extroverts, storytellers, and minimalists are heard equally. A few key principles to effective and respectful communication: clarity, express yourself clearly and concisely to prevent misunderstanding and get a chance for people to keep your ideas in mind. Openness, if something feels off, ask for clarification before reacting. Empathy and active listening, try to understand different perspectives. Constructive thinking, instead of thinking in rigid right or wrong terms, especially when it comes to labeling people rather than ideas. Let's consider, is this idea constructive or not? Is it beneficial or not? Does it solve problems or create them? Does it bring people together or does it exclude others? Then, not least, cultural awareness. Recognize that perspectives are shaped by background and experience. Be curious on how a person can arrive to an opinion. Above all, let's engage thoughtfully, listen actively, and keep the space respectful and open. Now let's begin.
Great. So feel free to raise your hands if you have questions or comments. There must be a few, right? Yeah, Neil, go ahead.
I wasn't expecting to be first. All right. Anyway, I think that the rate of inflation published by the government doesn't match the numbers that I'm seeing. Like if I go to a grocery store, like if I see a can of food that used to be 99 cents is now $1.50, that doesn't seem to align with what the government is saying. So I think what they're calculating doesn't match reality. And then I would pose the question, well, what is reality? What is the real inflation? And is the government number so far off from reality that we need some other way to calculate it, some other formula, basically?
So the reason that you don't see that is because the CPI is made up of a whole basket of goods, and it's very likely that the things that you're looking at were adversely affected in multiple ways. So if you're looking at a can of food, you have to look at the aluminum tariffs that Trump put in place. That can is made out of aluminum. Well, that aluminum is now being charged tariffs from Canada, by the way, who we had to claim, or Trump had to claim, that Canada was a security threat to the United States to put those tariffs in place. And that's what he claimed. And he somehow got away with claiming that Canada is a security threat. They didn't claim that we were going to become the, I don't remember how many provinces there are in Canada, but the N+1th province. You know, if anyone's a security threat to anyone, we're a security threat to them rather than the other way around, by calling them the 51st state and saying that we want to, make them that such. So you have to remember that CPI doesn't affect all things equally, is what I'm trying to say. I'm digressing a little bit, sorry. But it doesn't affect all things equally. So some things have gone up more than 8%, some things have gone up less. Um, does that make sense, Neil?
It does. It just seems like of the things that I'm purchasing in the store, like a typical average purchase, it just seems like the numbers the government is quoting for increases. I know it, like I don't think I've seen that many things go down or even stay the
No,
same.
nothing's going down, and it
Yeah,
never like very like there's no forces that I can think of that are significant enough to outweigh the increase in money supply, the increase in tariffs, all of the trends are towards upward prices. So it's not about whether or
yeah,
not it would go down. They're all going up, and they all should go up according to economic healthfulness.
yeah.
Question is, how much are each one going up? And in order to do that calculation, what I would encourage you to do, Neil, if you think that the government's fudging their numbers, do the research yourself. Try to recalculate the basket of goods and the CPI. I would love to hear what you find out. I will tell you, when I did research the CPI numbers, it it is true that the government does fudge it. And what I mean by that is they changed the definition of CPI, like
That's part of it. Yeah,
in order to make the CPI look better than it really is. And so
yeah.
it's definitely going on. I fact checked that one and it does turn out to be definitely true. So that's definitely going on. Whether or not uh whether or not but I still think it would be an interesting exercise if you want to spend an
Yeah.
hour or two in front of ChatGPT trying to recalculate the CPI basket of goods and seeing whether or not you can justify
Well, I
something
guess
similar.
I'm looking at it in a broader sense. I'm asking the question, is the CPI basket of goods the correct choice of basket? That's what I'm saying.
Then do
Like
that.
I'm
Look at that. Look
yeah.
at that.
Like for
Because I agree
example,
with you, and that's
it
where, Ari was saying, well, wealthy people buy more real estate and housing. That's true, but I don't think the wealthy segment of real estate and housing is what would be impacted by the CPI because it's, the top 1% of properties that are going up there. And I'm guessing that they take, a median, not an average, because an average is generally considered not statistically significant. So those types of purchases, would be considered a statistical anomaly that probably wouldn't be considered for CPI. And the government, trust me, would love to ignore anything that keeps CPI low. And so they love to do that because everybody looks good when CPI stays low, except for the truth. The truth looks ugly right then. So, and quite frankly, the government doesn't yet ascribe to the five intentions. They're not looking to seek truth. They're looking to look good. So, thank you, Neil, for the question. And George, go ahead.
Wonderful presentation. Thank you very much, Garrett. I just wanted to add the money multiplier mechanism. Actually, it doesn't really work anymore like that. It's has been changed, and it's during the COVID, the minimum reserves on U.S. banks have been actually lifted. So, in fact, um, they don't have many limitations on how much they can lend. That has the Fed actually has gave away with the limitations. So to also Neil to add, of course, the more the food the products that are usually most required or most used, they usually tend to um, go higher up in the price because they cannot be easily supplement something else, or they cannot be um, that people need to keep buying. It's usually that lower inflation is in the goods that are not really purchased on a daily basis. So if you buy more things, if you actually on lower income and you're spending most of your income on food, that these people actually will be affected by inflation more than anybody else. And just one more comment. I noticed that there was in your graph, and it represented three groups over the period of time. You can see actually also the middle, should I say middle class or middle income group almost losing, or should I say decreasing in the wealth. So that was kind of disappearing middle class, say. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, George. And I forgot to say, and Margo, we should incorporate this into your presentation, Pete, or your pitch is that when you raise your hand, try to stick to one comment or question at a time, and that way we can get through all the hands. And I also don't want to spend too much time on each hand raised, and so that way we can get through everybody. But you can ask as many questions or make as many comments as you want. So after your one comment or question, just put your hand down and raise it again and go right back in line. So the first thing is you said that reserves don't work that way anymore. What did you mean by that, George? Just so that I can understand it better.
Okay. Effectively, the banks are not intermediaries; they actually generators of the credit. And there was a capital reserve that is required, which can be worked as a multiplier. But as I understand that during the COVID period, that minimal requirement has been taken out for US banks.
So you're saying they can lend unlimited amounts of money, is what you're saying?
It's actually boils down to that.
Yeah, I don't think it's accurate that they can lend unlimited amounts. But what happened is there were a lot of financial, and I forget all the regulatory actions, but there were a bunch of regulations put in by Democrats actually to like limit the amount of lending that they could do and that banks could do. And what you might be talking about is the rollback of those, which just allowed banks to lend more. And that's really what I was saying though, George, is that when a bank gets money, they can lend out more money than they're given. Because, let's say a bank gets $100 million. Well, they only need to keep, let's say, 20% of that 100 million in their reserves. Well, now that $100 million, they can lend out 5 times as much as the $100 million, so they can lend out $500 million. So now giving the bank $100 million put $500 million into the economy. So I think that's consistent with what you're saying. Is that right, George?
I'm not quite. I would say probably not exactly.
Okay.
That's interpretation that you gave is correct to some extent, but I'm saying that there is actually no need for that kind of level of money, should I say, deposit required anymore.
I think you should try putting that into ChatGPT about whether or not banks still have to have reserves, and I'm pretty confident you'll find that they do. If anyone can do that real quick, go for it. But I'm pretty confident banks still need reserves. They just don't need as conservative reserves, meaning they can lend out much more than they were able to under the more conservative rules that were created in the wake of the 2008 financial services crisis, where financial services businesses became so overextended that there was like no one was lending money to anyone because no one trusted that anyone had enough money to actually pay their debts. And so 2008 was a wake-up call. We put in place lots of regulations, and you're probably right that those regulations were gutted. And so they're probably no longer as strict about the reserves. So let's go to Brian next. Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Garrett. Thank you for this complex topic. Yeah, it gives us so much food for thought, but I really think it has something to do with bad management because there are two categories One category has not enough personnel, and they're not hiring enough, and another category has plenty of personnel, yet they are motivated by just greed. They just want to raise prices frivolously when they don't even have to. The other category where they don't have enough personnel, they try to keep the prices low, but they simply have bad management, and they don't know how to get people to hustle and get into an almost compartmentalized, a structured environment where everyone is trying to do part of their work in a very efficient and fast way to keep the prices low. So it's this thing where people just keep copying each other, and they get frustrated with each other, and they keep wanting to just raise prices and hurt the consumer public. That's the observation that I like to share with you guys.
So you're definitely right that there's greedflation. I mentioned that where people are motivated by greed and they raise the prices more than they need to. But when you say, I didn't understand the side about people that don't have enough personnel. What do you mean by that?
Well, some people like the quiet serenity of a quiet workplace, yet they know that they have to produce a lot of output in order to keep the prices low. But yet they don't do what's necessary to not hurt the consumer public and not hurt the demand with the correct introduction of goods and services into our communities.
Maybe it's because it's been a long day for me. I'm having trouble understanding that. I thought it sounded like you were going into the people with plenty of personnel with your answer. I was asking about the one with people without enough personnel.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, even the place where there is a lot of personnel, I mean, they like that quiet environment. But when you are dealing with consumer products where inflation actually hurts the public, where we are the consumers, the place with the plenty of personnel, they seem to just want to raise prices just to,
Yeah, no,
you know,
I was trying to ask about the other of the two
mhm,
categories. Yeah,
okay.
I heard you on the plenty of personnel, and
Hmm.
I agreed with you that greedflation is a thing. I presented about that. What about
Hmm.
the ones that are not enough personnel? Why would that lead to higher prices, consumer facing prices?
Well, out of frustration, they believe that, they're being overworked with the given amount of the number of employees. So they want to express that, their services and their work output should be more valued. So they want to increase the prices in that way.
Why do you think that the money supply doesn't affect the value of money?
The money supply doesn't affect the
Yeah,
value of money.
yeah. Why do you
Well,
think that? Like,
yeah, that I haven't really, put that much into thought about the money supply having value in the money yet, but I believe that's where the consumers are affected mostly. Um,
well,
and
why don't we do
mhm,
a simulation?
mm,
Let's suppose that you know, let's suppose that there are three of us, right? And
mhm.
I think I did a bad job in the presentation, is what I'm learning from your question of
No, no,
explaining.
you did a great job. Don't
Oh,
No, no,
thank
no,
you.
not at
No, no,
all.
I'm not meaning that you're criticizing it. I'm criticizing it myself. So, based on your question, I feel like I didn't make a good argument that money supply, like, and that the scarcity of money was important. So let me give an example of, let's say that we're trading candy bars after Halloween, right? We're kids and we're trading candy bars after Halloween, and I have a bunch of I have only Twixes, right? And you like Twixes, but you have no Twixes. You have a bunch of Milky Ways. And let's say I only have, 5 Twixes and you have 20 Milky Ways, theoretically, I should give you 1 Twix for 4 of your Milky Ways or 5 of your Milky Ways because there's less Twixes. And if we're going to trade, I want it to be a fair trade. Does that sound fair?
Oh yeah, of course that sounds fair.
But then suppose Ginny was trick-or-treating with us and she's got 30 Twixes. Suddenly you're going to trade with Ginny because she's got way more Twixes and she's going to give you 2 Twixes for every one of your Milky Ways.
Okay. Uh-huh.
So the point is that when there's more of something, it becomes less valuable. What I thought was my valuable Twixes actually becomes less value when Ginny comes into the play and she was faster on her feet than me and she had more Twixes, more Milky Twixes. And so the same is true about money. When more money is put into the money supply, everybody's money is worth less, except for the people that are getting lent the more money, which is, as I mentioned, the higher wealth earners. So, it's definitely going to cause inflation. The only reason it didn't cause inflation faster is because that money went to the wealthiest people who didn't really have a strong influence on CPI.
Ah, okay. Yeah,
Does that
great,
make
great.
it more clear?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'll think about that a little bit more.
Now you'll agree
Thanks
with
a
my
lot.
criticism. So
Yeah.
I know, Margot, we have to finish the conversation, but we'll get there. So,
Well, thank you
um,
for including me in the transaction. I didn't know I could be
you
so
know, do you like Twixes, Ginny? I hope you do. I hope I didn't mischaracterize you as a
sure.
Twix
Why
fan.
not?
So I love Twixes, so that's why I use that. I love Milky Way, so I use them as examples. So, Alan, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. Well, actually, at this point, I was going to make a comment that if you have a productivity increase from the wealthy who have invested the money in machinery and equipment, then that productivity increase would probably make up for any possible increases in money supply and the impact on the price level. But the other comment, like I don't know the American banking system very well, but like in Canada, like I know Consumer Price Index, there's adjustments in there for technological change and various adjustments, and they tend to reduce or make the inflation rate look lower. So but the thing is, the poor, the lower income people, and the 10%, they're not going to be buying the brand new car, which although it may have gone up, but then it may be valued almost the same because of the technological change. Because over so many years, you never had all this automatic driving and all this stuff that they have. Then the impact is on a lot of things is that the lower income people are most affected because they buy the food products and the staple products, and those are affected by supply and demand, and also by the costs of their inputs into producing the product. So and as you mentioned, the well-off people, they're going to be investing in properties and real estate and stuff like that. But the indirect effect also of having real estate investments, and especially investing into properties and rentals, the demand increases, but it also makes the rents go up, because the more people competing for that one house that has whatever, a duplex or whatever, they're going to raise the rents for those people. And again, the bottom 10% are going to be most affected by that. The end result is the bottom 10% are the worst off.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was trying to say, and I agree with you 100%, Alan, is like the bottom 50%, quite frankly, have, what is it like, what was the best example was something like 2.4% of wealth, right? The bottom
Yes, yeah.
50% have 2.4% of net worth. Like that's like, how do we call that fair in society? Like, look, I'm a smart guy, I'm a hardworking guy. I think I should make more money than the average person because of that. But I still don't feel like it's fair to have the bottom 50% of people have 2.4% of the wealth. Although I will say one thing, there is one scenario under which I would say it is fair. And the scenario is if every one of those people in the bottom 50% were making the modern day equivalent of $100,000 USD a year, that's what we're striving for in the Free Thinker Institute. Like, as an organization, one of our organization's goals is so that every person in the world, not just in the US, but in the world, makes that kind of money in modern USD dollars. And if everybody made that money, I wouldn't care if the bottom 50% were so small. That would just mean the wealthy people were fabulously wealthy and great at creating economic value, and give them that money, cool. But don't make people worry about whether or not they can feed their kids. And don't make people worry about whether or not they're gonna pay a hospital bill or like go to the hospital. I know there are a lot of people that won't even go to the hospital even if they're in dire straits because they know that they'll go bankrupt if they go to the hospital. And so,
we have it a little bit easier here because we have socialized national health care, but it's eroded too. We don't have all the services. Like if I wanted robotic surgery, which is so much easier for me, and my recovery is much faster, I have to pay that out of my own pocket, which might be 7,000-8,000 for something or more. Whereas I get the old scalpel method, which is still pretty good. That's what they say. So anyway, those were very quick ones. The productivity cycle and the matching, I can't remember the formulas for it, but you can. That's economic cycles there.
Cool. Thank you, Alan. Will, go ahead.
Thanks, Garrett. Yeah, interesting. So I was just thinking then, so just two things very quickly. One is, I think it's interesting philosophically, you said because you're a very bright person and you work hard as well. So I think if I understood that correctly, you said you deserve to make more money than average because you work very hard and you're clever. Well, I agree. You're very clever, but you're top 5%, I think. But anyway, I just think philosophically, because somebody's clever, should that entitle them to make more money? I understand working hard. Yes, that's hard to disagree with. But the cleverness thing, is that anyway, it's philosophically, I just think, just want.
That's a great question, Will. And actually, it's not always the one. And it depends on what you mean by, I said smart, you said clever. Really, I should actually present my my hypothesis on types of intelligence sometime. I'm going to add that as a future thing to talk about because there are many types of intelligence. And when I say smart, I don't just mean like IQ smart, because actually that's not what's shown to make people more money. Having a good EQ is far more important than having a good IQ. And, I think I have good internal EQ, like self-regulation of emotions, but I'm not the best at reading the room and understanding what everyone is feeling at any given moment. I do see it sometimes, but I'm not like top tier in that. And so all I'm trying to say is someone who is most productive economically, meaning someone who adds the most amount of economic value, should be making more money, because if you help the people who add the most economic value to make more money, you're giving money to people who will grow that money better, more effectively than the people who are not as good at growing wealth. And so, people who are good wealth growers, I should say, should have more wealth. And I'm okay with that. I don't mind if they're billionaires. I don't think anyone should be upset that they're billionaires. I just think we should be upset that the proportion of wealth is such that the bottom 50% of wealth, of earners are at like under 3% of the net worth of the population. Like that's a grossly unfair proportion, where the top 10% are like more than double the other 90% combined. Like that just feels very inherently unfair when you put it that way.
Yeah. There's gross inequality. And the different types of intelligence are really interesting. A bit of a digression, but I learned recently that that like one way to read, or one aspect of emotional intelligence, is reading other people's body language and facial expressions and micro expressions. And the best ones at that at the moment are Buddhist monks, apparently, but they're being closely pursued by AI facial recognition to read micro expressions, or whether somebody's like genuinely smiling, whether they've got a slight frown emerging. Like, it's really fascinating. But apparently Buddhist monks are the most attuned to that through meditation. But I'll just make my main point, and that'd be great if you could do a session on the different types of intelligence. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Just very quickly, here in Australia, we've got a consumption tax. So there's no tax on fresh food. There's tax on processed food, fast food, but fresh fruit and vegetables, no tax on that. So it's an incentive for people to, you can manipulate it to drive people's behavior. And something I thought they could do to curb inflation is to put a super luxury tax on certain items. Like if you're going to spend up more than 100 grand on a car, or more than 5,000 on a watch, or more than 8,000 on a television, well, you can pay an extra, 10% tax on that. So they can curb inflation, because when the rich people, they don't get affected by inflation as much as the poorer people, because they can still afford stuff, but because they're still buying stuff, it's driving the inflationary pressure on normal goods and services that the poor, lower echelon of income have to, they have to foot the bill, literally. So I thought you could tweak it to target the super wealthy. If you're going to spend more than $300 on a meal, well, you pay an extra 20% tax on that. So there's a lot of leeway there with a consumption tax. Thanks very much.
Yeah, so the concern with a consumption tax for me for ultra luxury goods is you're gonna reduce the amount of spending that people with lots of money are gonna spend. And I don't know if you know this, but like a lot of like the prices that people pay for luxury goods are by far outpacing the value add. I mean, think about, what a Lamborghini costs, and you could buy a Toyota that's far more reliable, and sure, it doesn't go as fast, but are you like even allowed to drive that fast pretty much anywhere but Germany on the Autobahn? So how much better is it to have a Lamborghini? It's really a status symbol that just puts more money back into the economy. We want wealthy people to spend the money on stuff like Lamborghinis because it at least puts that money back into the economy. What I would argue would be more effective than a luxury because what that would do is it would get wealthy people to invest their money instead, make a higher return on investment, and then keep that money for themselves instead of investing it into the economy.
Yeah, good
What I
point.
would argue is better is a wealth tax, where you have a tax on the money that you have as your net worth over a certain amount gets taxed by a certain amount. A
All right.
1% tax of net worth over $10 million, right? $10 million is enough that if you invested $10 million in an intelligent way, you could live the rest of your life without ever having to work and live like high on the hog. You could basically have a $500,000 a year income, equivalent for the rest of your life if you invested the way that I invest, which is very easy to copy, and I presented about it in our savings and investment presentation. Um, and so, I would say that would be a very ethical way. And what that does is it gets wealthy people to invest their money in higher return ways so that they'll get an outsized return on investment. And it tells them to either spend it or invest it and try to find a way to make money on that money. And that money goes towards creating a more level playing field for society, where you have better education for the poor, who, often grow up without even being able to buy school books, right? And I knew people that, were in that situation, right, where they didn't have school books. At least I wasn't quite that poor, but some people have a really hard time in life, and I think we as society owe it to ourselves to try to give them a little bit more of a fair shake. And that's why I believe in socioeconomic affirmative action, even though I don't believe in race-based affirmative action. But that said, there are no hands up. So if anyone has questions, or did that make sense, Will, first of all?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think with everything you said there, but something I might have made clear is just that super luxury tax would be floating, so you could take it away altogether, or when inflation's starting to go up, you could throw it in, like at a level one, and then when inflation started to level off, you could take the tax away, so it wouldn't be there forever. So you could sort of stimulate the market as necessary in accordance with inflation, is what I meant. I didn't mean to put it there forever, but yeah. You wonder why, people like CEOs are earning sometimes, I think it's like 500 times per annum more than the average guy in the office, the average tech guy.
That's, it didn't
So
used to
wrong.
be this way, by the way. This is a fairly modern phenomena that came about when the what is it? I probably should look at the exact, I don't want to misquote, but the corporate greed kind of came about from when shareholder capitalism came about, where the the law basically says in the US, if you're a normal corporation and you're publicly traded, your first duty has to be to making shareholders as much money as possible. And anything you don't do that, you can be prosecuted by law for. And so if you want to run an ethical company, you have to be a B Corp, because that's the only way to insulate yourself from that law. Which if I'm successful, I don't think I'll ever be public. At least I don't want to be. But if I were to ever go public, it would be with a B Corp so that I wouldn't have to do that. Um, so Ari has his hand up. So go ahead, Ari.
Hi, I wanted to first validate, I think, what you're saying in hopefully a simple way that if wealthy people have an obscene amount of money, we want to encourage them to spend their money on things. So taxing the things they'd spend their money on, like Lamborghinis, would make them not spend their money, and we want to get that money back in the economy. That being said, it's really important, at least the way I see an economy as like an organism. We want the economy to be doing productive and healthy and useful things. And an extreme statement is we don't want to see the larger share of the economy go towards things like Lamborghinis. We want a smaller share of the economy to go towards Lamborghinis and more towards healthcare and education. So at the same time, taxing these things says you shouldn't spend your money on these things. But at the same time, if you have too much money, you should also be taxed almost for having too much money. So it's like it seems like a very practical philosophical idea that if there are things that are not good for society, which is not how our market system works, that then those things should be punished for doing those because they're not helpful for society. They're just frivolous and sort of childish vanity status symbols.
Yeah. So I agree with you, Ari, and I think what you're saying is that it would be better to have both a luxury goods tax and a wealth tax for a high amount of wealth. And actually I agree with you 100%. I think that's better than
So
what
I actually I love that idea, but I haven't thought it out that far because maybe there's unintentional consequences. But the philosophy is that we want people to use their money in things that are going to help society, and Lamborghinis just don't help society, right? Luxury yachts, they don't help
very
society,
little.
right? So
Yeah.
that's I don't know an application in a specific, but let's pretend in theory like we could see that luxury tax actually did that, and this then I'm totally for it. But I actually I don't know what would actually happen.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I love your point, Ari, that we really want to tax things that are not good for society and give tax benefits, I'll put on the other side, for things that are good for society. Like China gave huge amounts of money to the solar industry to help them improve their solar capabilities. And now the cheapest solar panels are in China. They probably also deconstructed and reconstructed a lot of US based solar panels, but that investment in solar energy has now made solar panels cheaper, than fossil fuels for producing energy. So that's kind of interesting. And I think if we had invested a little more in those types of, being a forerunner in those types of technology, then we would be better off as a country by having economic tools in our tool shed, if you will. So I think that's a great point, Ari. Thanks for making it. And I don't know if there are other unintended consequences either, but I'm pretty good at shooting holes in things. And I think that the combination of the two is a good combination. So, that said, if anyone wants to comment on that, feel free. Otherwise, we'll let Carrie go.
Oh yeah, it's real quick. If we tax things we want to disincentivize, and I agree that that's exactly what it does, why do we tax things like homes and income? Shouldn't those be exempt right off the bat?
Well, it depends on how much income you're talking about. Like income below a certain amount, there was a good argument made by Milton Friedman, who said there should be a negative, like a negative income tax. Pretty sure it was Milton Friedman, who I don't agree with all the time, but I thought this was a brilliant idea. Is if you make below, say, $10,000, the government pays you tax, right? They pay tax dollars to you because you're so poor that you need the extra money. And so there would be a gradual tax where the upper taxes should, to me, be much higher than they are. They were reduced under Trump when I thought they were already lower than they should have been. But you know, I hear what you're saying, Carrie, but like you kind of have to tax income if you want to have enough money to continue to pay our debt and run the government. But if you tax higher income people higher, then you could end up paying lower income people because it doesn't take that much to pay the bottom 50% when their net worth is so low. So you don't have to give them a lot of money each for it to matter. So, and not even the bottom 50%, but the bottom 20% maybe is probably who needs it the most. But we have people in poverty in America, in the wealthiest country in the world. We have people in poverty. We have people living in like tar roof sheds, like literally that don't have a normal house, that are living in the equivalent that there are chickens that live in better houses than people in America in some places.
Yeah. Oh, and for the record, I totally agree with you that the issue is less about disparity than it is about poverty.
Right. And that's where, for me, it like I agree. It is like I think that disparity is always going to be there. It will. But, I would argue instead of poverty, like, yes, I feel the most for people in poverty, but I think that $100,000 USD a year is an amount of money that, and adjusted for where you live, but that's enough money that you're not worried about money. And I just don't think, I think people should be allowed to pursue what they're interested in, pursue their passion, and be able to pursue it knowing that they're going to make a reasonable living pursuing whatever they're interested in. Now, today, that's not possible. Like, even if we took all the billionaires and trillionaires and we split their money up and divided it equally, we wouldn't be there. Okay. So, just to be clear, that is not a realistic today plan. But in 100 years from now, that should be very much a realistic plan. And what I'm trying to do with the Free Thinker Institute is plant a seed so that well after my death that will come to be true, because right now it's not moving in that direction. I want to see things moving in a direction where we're helping people, and we certainly could do a lot more to help people who are socioeconomically in a more difficult situation. And that's part of why I did my event on how to teach yourself how to find your dream job and teach yourself how to do it using ChatGPT. If you have internet access, which everybody does, you can do that and you can get a new job. It just takes grit, and when I say just grit, grit ain't easy, right? That grit is it's difficult and it takes hard work, but we all have the capability to have grit in us. We just need people who can motivate us. And that's part of what we do as members of the Free Thinker Institute. We have a new friend circle that we motivate each other, and we motivate each other to achieve our life's goals, form positive habits. And I think that, I have not been good at self-promotion. So I'm going to put a link in for people that want to learn more about the Free Thinker Institute, and it includes more information on membership. So I will put that in the chat. And someone asked about the savings and investment plan. So more about the FTI. Someone asked about the savings and investment plan that I talked about. I'm going to put a link for that as well, because we had it up on YouTube. And then Mandy, go ahead and share your thoughts.
Hello. Can you repeat again what you said about the shareholders? You said that if you have a particular kind of company, then you have to have shares. Because I did put a comment in the chat that when it comes to greed and prices, isn't the problem the shareholders? So should we not have shares in those companies then?
Yeah, I would. That's a really great question, Mandy. Very good question. If a company basically, let me explain what I first said, and then I'm going to get to your question. Let me just write a note because I lose track, especially after a really long day like today. Um, so what I said originally is that a corporation that's publicly traded has a fiduciary, meaning a financial duty to maximize shareholder value, which means do whatever they can, whether it's ethical or unethical. They're supposed to do whatever they can to make the most money for people who are shareholders in the company. And that is a legal responsibility if you are on a board of directors for a company and you don't put in a CEO that's going to do that, you can literally be sued and you can be, get in a lot of trouble for not following that fiduciary duty. Now, the way to get around this is doing what's called a B Corp. A B Corp is a social mission driven company that has a duty to do a social good. And they say, this is the social good we want to do. And we're going to spend some of our profits in that doing that social good. And so um, adding to shareholder value is not our first priority, and it doesn't need to be legally. And so your next question was, should we not invest in those companies? I would argue you're right. We shouldn't invest in those companies. If a company is not a B Corp, find a B Corp that does the same thing and invest, spend your dollars with them. The way we vote is with our pocketbooks, guys. Like we all vote with our pocketbooks. And the companies we spend money on are the ones that are going to grow. And not just you and me, but we tell our friends, we tell them to tell their friends, and we find the ethical companies. Costco is one, by the way. Costco is a generous capitalist business. What they do, and I've talked about this in the past, they figure out what they want their profit margins to be. They pay their suppliers well, they pay their employees well, both above market, and then they calculate the lowest price they can charge on their products to hit their revenue goals. So they always hit their revenue goals, and they also always tend to charge lower prices than anywhere else you're going to buy what you buy in Costco. Try comparing prices between Costco and anywhere else. You'll find Costco is cheaper. And it's because they have this desire to be more generous with everybody in the industry. And so if you spend your money on Costco, you're better off, right? And you're doing good in the world. And I like to say, if there's an unethical company and everybody stops spending money with them, and there's an ethical competitor and everyone starts spending money with them, guess what? The unethical company goes away. No company exists without customers. So just stop. You have to research, and this takes work. I'm not going to tell you life is easy, right? Life's not easy. But if you want to do good in the world, you have to do the work and look at the ethical companies and look at the unethical ones and spend your dollars with the ethical companies. Carly, I'm glad you have your hand up. I've seen lots of emojis. I want to see your hand.
I've been trying to figure out what to say. Thank you. I have a bunch of family members who do not notice where their money goes ethically as much as they do by how they're influenced through their media. So if they're watching Fox News all the time and they have this mentality of fear, 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 and security systems and whatever it is that gets advertised on that station, they're much more likely to buy that. How is it that we can actually influence people and, I don't know, break that addiction to a particular media source that has particular money sources, that has agendas that swindle people in some ways?
I think the best thing Fox News did like ask them why they watch Fox News, and they'll probably say to get the news. And then ask them to read about the Dominion court case, where Fox News itself said, we're not a news station. We're just an entertainment network. Right?
I have done that in particular. Yeah, no, that's a great idea. I've done that specifically and even
then the
sat
other
down
thing,
yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Carly.
I was gonna say, I've even sat down and said, okay, well, let's compare what it is they say and how they say it and who says it, etc. And even though they logically know, there is an addiction factor there of, well, I only watch the left or the whatever liberal guy on Fox News, who's not at all liberal, but there's an aspect of identity that people focus on, that they don't realize they've been co-opted by fear and,
Yes.
the capitalists, whatever. So I'm just curious if that is something that could be broken by, who buys Fords or Teslas or Lamborghinis or whatever. That changes over time, but I think it is manipulated by how that is seen within the culture.
It is. I agree with you. And I would say another thing you should mention to them is, the whole settlement. Fox News, settled for like, I forget what it was, like a significant portion of $1 billion because they lied on the air and basically made stuff up that wasn't true. And so for people watching Fox News, you have to say, look, if they settled for almost $1 billion, imagine what the court case would have been if it had gone all the way to trial. It would have been even more than that. And if that's who you're relying on as a source, someone who lied so badly that they were willing to pay a good portion of $1 billion for without, in order to avoid admitting that they lied, because if the court case had said that they lied, they would have looked even worse. Then it would have been clearly on the books by judiciary that they lied.
I hear you, and I agree with that logic, and I'm well familiar with it and made that case. I guess my point is that this person says, well, I watched Brit Hume because he's not like the others, et cetera, and don't kind of recognize their addiction. And if I go into other cultures or areas or whatever with people that tend to have that sort of mentality of they know better and everybody's corrupt and it's the us against them mentality. That anyway, my point is it's great to know how to figure out where money goes, but I think that's difficult on a lot of levels for people. And most of us may go ahead and believe somebody that we trust that tells us something. That said, that sometimes can change behavior, other times doesn't. Is there a way that we can have some sort of resource to which we can point them? Because the people that I talk to on that side of the fence, they claim to do their own research, but all that means is that they listen to Brit Hume or whatever.
I did my research. I watched Brit and I did I believed what he told me, or she told me. I don't know. I don't watch a lot of regular media because I find researching things as I come to a better conclusion and I look for independent sources. So I would invite your family members here, Carly. Invite them to the FTI.
Yep.
And ask them if they agree with our 5 intentions, which actually I may pull up because we don't have a ton of questions. I want to pull up the 5 intentions and sort of walk
Good
people.
idea. Do it.
So okay, there we go. So I'm gonna kind of talk through quickly the 5 intentions for people that want to learn about. And the other thing I want to say, Carly, is ask them thoughtful questions. Don't tell them what to do or where to go. Just ask them thoughtful question that plants seeds of doubt and say, oh, well, let's research that. Let's research, what is ask them, what's the thing that upset you the most that you saw on Fox News? And then when they tell you, fact check it. And by the way, I did this. Like I watched Fox News for, a bunch of times. And every time I watched, there would be something that really upset me and made me angry at the Democrats. And then I would fact check it. And it turned out that they were completely misrepresenting the situation and skewing it in a way that was not loyal to the facts. They were not seeking truth. They were looking to convince people by twisting the truth. And so, I've done that enough that I don't watch Fox News anymore because now I've done it like 10 times. And it's like every time there's an emotionally laden thing that comes out of Fox News, it's all BS. And so at this point, I just don't trust them anymore. And I wish more people would fact check them. So let me share the FTI's 5 intentions. So the first is to be the best version of yourself, seek truth and be fair. That's our North Star, which is why it's 3 stars, because they're the 3 stars tied for number 1. The next is getting into having thoughts that align with seeking truth, being fair, and being the best version of ourselves. And to do that, we transparently share our beliefs to the extent we trust someone with other people. And then we listen to those people with an open mind to what they say in case they have ideas that will help us be a better version of ourselves, get closer to truth, and be more fair. And that's the second intention, is to transparently share beliefs and listen with an open mind. The third is to hone our critical thinking skills so we can better discern fact from fiction and wisdom from folly. And doing that, we reject false beliefs, we accept more true beliefs, and now our current beliefs are more solid, more aligned with truth and fairness and being a better version of ourselves than they were before. And this is a cycle that repeats as we continue to do it, and our thought process, our beliefs get better and better as we continue to cycle through. Now, the fourth intention is about actions, which the first of which is to prevent significant unnecessary harm from happening to all people whenever we can influence it, all across the world. And I would argue that's an objective ethical rule. And I made the presentation for that another night, which should be up on YouTube if you search for it. And then the next action is, once we've done that, to increase happiness and decrease harm for the people we can influence, with a higher priority on the people we can influence more. And I think it's great what you're doing, Carly, and that you're trying to share what you think is true and fair with your family members that you think are misaligned. And there are right-leaning news sources that are more factually aligned that I think are still good to listen to. I don't think it's good to ignore the right-wing side. It's just good to use sources that are factual in trying to educate yourself about the right-wing perspective. And Fox is not one of them. OAN is even worse. And so the ones that are the most popular are unfortunately the ones that spread the most misinformation. But there are good, if you go to Media Bias Fact Check, there's a Media Bias Fact Check has the credibility of facts portrayed by the different media sources. So depending, for everybody here, that's another thing, Carly, that you could introduce your family members to, is Media Bias Fact Check. And I recommend everyone check that out. There are a bunch of tools like that that you can use to check the level of factual nature of reporting that they do. The last is an eagerness to express, accept, and reciprocate love, platonic as well as romantic, meaning non-romantic as platonic. And that's kind of the icing on the cake that I was talking about earlier. So if anyone wants this, I can share it. And I'll try to put a link in with this in case anyone wants it.
Cool. Thank you, Garrett. That is awesome. I
And
think
so,
that
Carly, go ahead.
the number of people that are here still, and the type of people that are here, tend to be the type of people I see elsewhere that are engaged and thoughtful and want to actually contribute to finding how to make the world a better place. My concern, and granted, these are mostly elderly people in my life, but is that addiction factor where people get so overwhelmed by so many things that they get streamlined into something that is non-factual and not reality-based. And it's hard to break that, especially like you said, with the confronting them, it's being confrontational, but it does take planting the seeds, and it takes alternates and such. And so when I mentioned like, hey, don't watch Fox News for a week. Well, what am I supposed to watch? CNN? I was like, anything, literally anything. So anyway, point being is that that is sensationalized and that is manipulated to get people addicted. But doing here and trying to spread information and getting more FTI institutes all over and just slowly sort of starting to spread it, I think is wonderful. So thank you so much for what you do, Garrett.
Thank you. And Carly, please reach out to me and let's create a local chapter of the FTI in Denver.
I'm ready to roll. I'll do it today.
All right, do it, please. And that goes for anyone that wants to start a local FTI chapter. You can have in-person events, and I will tell you the quality of people you get when you advertise the 5 intentions are the values of the organization are incredible. They're people like Margot, for example. They're incredible. I'm going to put the 5 intentions thing in the chat so that other people can look, so you guys can download it if you like it. I also didn't mention my 2 favorite quotes are on there, which is keep your hopes high and your disappointment low. It's the only way to go. And then the second is don't stress, just do your best and accept the rest. You can't do better than your best. So once you've done your best and you know you have, let the rest go. Don't stress out about it. You have to let the cards fall where they may once you've done your best. So do your best, work hard, do your best. But once you've done your best, don't stress about it. Ari.
Hey Garrett, I really, really enjoy and appreciate, and with future me in mind, I would love to be a host of an FTI local thing, and I
Cool.
will maybe pursue that as a future me. But I have to challenge something that is
Yeah.
a big challenge in me. And so, first of all, I believe in this, but it's like in a society that's post-truth and post-fact, there's a lot of people that, number one, don't even agree that truth is a real thing. It's
I
just some
know.
relativism. And
Yeah.
then also this idea that, let's say there is a truth out there. My personal experience with pretty much everything I study, for the most part, is that, everything from neuroscience to physics to history and society and religion, is people are interested in some measure of the truth, or maybe not even in the truth. And so I really have a challenge, and I guess I want you to convince me through another meetup event. Is the search for truth really something people want? And let's say it is, because I believe it is for me and it is for you. But how do you get people to actually believe that truth is real, that it exists, and that they want it? Because to me, it seems like most people, many, many people, you would call them masses, and I don't want to call them stupid people because I don't believe in that. But it would seem my overall experience is people are not interested or are afraid of the truth. That's my point.
So it's interesting you say that. Like, I would actually say a lot of people who I think have misunderstandings will argue that they say what they believe is true by saying, I know it's not nice, but this is the truth. It's the hard truth. That's why I'm sharing it. And so what I would argue is that what I would do to try to convince you that people want to search for the truth is ask people, Ari. Just ask everybody you meet, hey, is the truth important to you? Do you want to know the truth? Ask everybody, and I guarantee everyone, even if there's someone that, like is completely full of misunderstandings left and right, they'll still tell you that the truth is important to them. Pretty much everybody will say the truth is important to them. Now, you're right that there are some people in the postmodernist era that say there is no such thing as truth, right? There is no objective truth. And for those people, I'll say, well, suppose there are three philosophers in front of a wall, and two of them say the wall doesn't exist. It's not true that there's a wall there, and they try to walk through the wall. Will they be able to? And the answer is very clear. There's a wall there. They will hit their heads, and they will suddenly realize, oh, maybe there was a wall there after all. Now, some of them will be so pig-headed that they'll go, there was no wall there. Something happened. Something happened. I don't know what happened, but there was no wall there. And some people are so stuck in egotism that they deny the truth come hell or high water. But they will still say, they will deny what you and I see is the truth, but they will still say they're seeking truth. Does that make sense, Ari?
It does, but I want to push back. And again, it feels so much like a longer conversation, so I don't want to hijack anything. But it's something along the lines of, yes, rationally, people will say preemptively, yes, I'm interested in the truth. And then when the truth gets scary and it shows the self-contradictions they have in their self, this is the essence of the idea of the Sphinx. And people like Kafka or Dostoevsky point into really hard things that are terribly painful. And people generally, this is what I would call the terrifying places of the mind. They have limits, and that oftentimes that there's a cognitive dissonance that, yes, people say they want the truth in their mind, but when their actions in their lives, they don't want truth. And there's a tension between there, and it's not a black and white as I'm trying to avoid. I'm not saying that they're not interested in truth. It's like a gray area, and they can only handle, I don't know, certain truths. Like the brain needs updating reality, but at a
Yeah.
certain point it can't. It also gets overwhelmed that if it challenges the level of the self, and the self has defense mechanisms that are really, really strong. Is the person, I don't know her name, was saying about addictions, the perfect
Yeah.
example of where people just really reject truth. And
Right.
so for me, this is a deep, difficult conversation about how do you get people interested in realizing that truth is good, truth is real, and that we should seek it. And we should, to me, I would say you have to cultivate the courage to go after it, because it requires a lot of courage, or other things like this. It's not so simple, right? And there's a difference between just what I idealize as a rational idea and what I experience in the real world. And the difference between that for a lot of people is a huge chasm, including myself. I struggle with this, right? I think we all do.
I think that that leads me to thinking that we should have another event on why the first intention is so important. But to answer your question about how to get through to those people that are, stuck in cognitive dissonance, it's the five intentions. If you get them to share their beliefs with other people and listen to you with an open mind, now they have to agree, I'm going to listen to you with an open mind. And if they don't, you need to say, hey, were you listening to me with an open mind here? And then what do your critical thinking skills say? And ask them thoughtful questions that point out the hypocrisy in their opinions. And if they double down on wrong, at that point, there's nothing really more than you can do to point out that they were doubling down on wrong. And you want to do it ever so politely so you don't ruin your relationship with them, because then you won't be able to influence them at all. And then you might back down to like teaching them about confirmation bias, because I would argue every human being has confirmation bias. All of us have it. And most people are so mired in it that the truth is scarier, and like a new truth is scarier to them. And so they deny new truths. And I like to say it's okay to, admit you're wrong, because when you do with good judgment, you're immediately right again, and you're more right than you were before. The only time you're ever truly wrong is when it's clear to everybody that you're wrong and you refuse to admit it. And when you say it that way, it kind of gives someone a little bit of a carrot to be right, to admit they're wrong, and a stick to not admit they're wrong, because they'll be that odd person left out who refuses to acknowledge when they're wrong. And so I think that saying might be helpful in your journey, Ari.
Very nice. Now, if I could, the sine qua non of what I just heard is essentially cultivate good relationships. Those good relationships allow people to then access truth where they can feel safe and curious as opposed to threatened. And yeah. So, anyways,
and that's why I not challenge them directly, which I used to do all the time, and I still catch myself doing sometimes. To be honest, we all do that. It's the natural psychological way, as we say, you're wrong and I'm right, and this is why. But that's not the way. That's not the right path forward. And that's that has had his or her hand up for a while. So go ahead, Zen.
Thank you. Last thing I want to say is I really appreciate. Thank you. This is fantastic. I really appreciate you.
Thank you as well. Zen, go ahead.
Yeah, I raised my hand in response to what Carly was saying. And one thing it brought to mind is that they're in a state of fear, and fear brings out the reptilian brain. It totally screws up creative thinking. They're not in a brain pattern that's open to learning new things. They're in a state of panic. And I think that might be part of what the addiction is they're so afraid they got to find out what's happening next, because they're under constant fear of constant attack. They feel like things are really going really, really bad. Well, we're starting to feel that way too. But so, and yeah, I liked what you were saying of being very gentle and questioning, and not directing it at them, but what do they think, because we have it, there's going to be a tendency to have opposing sides. And it increase when one side gets escalated. One thing I learned in de-escalation was that when we're in that confronting somebody that's escalated, we're going to escalate too. As their frequency or aggravation increases, it's going to make us want to go in that direction too and counterbalance it. And we have to be constantly aware of ourselves, and if we're getting dragged into that in a confrontational way, instead of being able to be that calm sounding board right in the middle and just, what do you think? And because I really, I've been watching this since the Reagan administration. I think that's where I noticed it starting. Mm-hmm. And it didn't get all the way that time, but I think they've got a better foothold this time.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we just have to remember to watch ourselves and not get dragged into a shouting match.
You're exactly right. And I agree 100%, Zen. And Carly, you're talking about stuff that I've talked about. You're writing in the chat about stuff that I've talked about in the past. It's exactly right, is that there's an amygdala hijacking. And your logical brain shuts down when you get emotional. And so what I would encourage Carly and Zen, for people that you know, or for everybody, for people you have in your lives that are going through this emotional hijacking that's going on all the time from the media, what I would recommend doing is say to them, look, when you hear something upsetting, write down what it is you heard, and ideally, like, see if you can find a video of it on YouTube or something so that you can, see exactly what they said, and then step away from the media and try to fact check it. Try to look for an objective source that doesn't have the bias of, whether it's a right-wing bias or left-wing bias. Look for a source that doesn't have the same bias as the person who shared that emotional situation with you. And if you can find someone without that political bias that validates that a supposed fact is a fact, then great, then it's probably true. If you can't find a single one, well, probably that thing is not true. Because if the only people sharing that supposed thing, and usually what I found is when I did that, I found a series of facts that were related to that situation, but where the facts were completely misconstrued in a way that was not doing justice to seeking truth and being fair. It was basically twisting a fact to the point that it was no longer, any semblance of the original fact. And so if you get someone to step away from the news and fact check every time they get emotional, that'll calm them down. It'll get them more to the logical part of their brain, and it'll get them to look for whether or not their source that's telling them these upsetting things is accurate. And if they fact check them enough and they don't find anyone corroborating the facts, well, hopefully they'll stop trusting that source so much. And, that's really what I would recommend. And one of the life skills that I'm going to talk about is how do we deal with aggression and when someone is aggressive towards us. And what I would argue we should do is absorb their negativity and aggression and just respond back with polite thoughtfulness. And I'll try to leave it at that because I got my time warning, but we'll talk about that in more detail at the presentation on the different types of intelligence that I'll present. And we have 3 hands up too. I also want to get to those. So, Mandy, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say it's 1:45, and for me, I always like practical tips. So I was wondering if you could always, near the end, always give us some practical tips that you suggest. You did say to me about the B Corps, and I've already found out there's 170 of them in Ontario. So I'm going to totally get on top of that. And for me, closing remarks are always helpful for me because I like practical things and how I can do things in my day to day to help your cause. Thank
Mandy,
you.
you should join as a member of the FTI. I'm going to put our membership Google Doc so you can learn how to join as a member. I think you would enjoy being a member. There's no fee, by the way. Membership information for the
Do you think so? Because I am British, and sometimes I can really go for someone's jugular, and that's not always the best.
Well, we'll politely suggest that you're going for their jugular, and you may want to try a different approach. That's part of what having a peer mentoring circle is about.
Excellent. Thank you.
Of course, that's the whole point of being members, right? Is that we help each other to be a better version of ourselves, to get closer to truth and to be more fair. And if we don't have a group of people doing that for us already, which most of us do not, you're gonna learn that you will benefit a lot by having one, because it will help you progress in all 3 areas.
Thank you.
Of course. And I like your suggestion of having closing remarks. I normally don't do that. I'm normally so exhausted by the end that I'm not ready to be pithy, but I'll try to think of something. I try to give all my best wisdom along the way, the quotes and stuff like that from the one pager, and but I'll try to think of regarding inflation. I'll try to
Yeah,
think.
maybe if it's not today, maybe from going forward. And that's
Yeah.
only because I always need something practical. Like I can always say, why are they doing this? Why are they doing that? But I want to know
Yes.
what I can do. And 2 things I think we can do. One was me for the B Corps. The other thing I forgot was that can we all look at what shares we have in what companies? And maybe it's time for us to step up and take them out of that.
Yeah, I agree. If you are an owner of an unethical company, it's wise to sell those shares, right? Actually, if you look at, remember I gave Costco as a good example of an ethical company. Look at their share price. They're killing it. They're killing it. They're doing great. So ethics actually pays, because let's face it, I've asked a lot of people, would you rather do business with a greedy company or a generous one? No one said the greedy one yet. So if you actually invest in businesses that are generous, guess what? They're going to be more successful because everyone wants to do business with us. So, generous capitalism is the capitalism of the future as long as we vote with our wallets. And if we found companies, we make our companies generous capitalist companies so that there are alternatives in every space. There isn't right now a generous capitalist business in every corner, but there are a lot of B Corps out there. So that's a good starting point. And then hopefully we can go from B Corp to generous capitalist, which includes B Corp as part of the certification that we're working to put together. Thank you, Mandy. And I love the focus on practicality. I always want to be practical. That's why I call what we do practical philosophy, which is now in modern terms called positive psychology for the most part. But so Margot.
Yes, I would like to share two or three thoughts about how to deal with people when we are sure that they are wrong and we are right. What is concerning to me the most is the rigidity, the intellectual and mental rigidity of people that is developing. So call it addiction, call it fear, call it reaction. And I think or believe that the least thing we should do when we see that obviously somebody is wrong is to tell them they are wrong, because it's just adding to the rigidity and it's not adding a connection, is more disconnecting than connecting. And I think if we can stay grounded and observe in which mental state they are or which emotion they are, and maybe keep the contact and keep the connection in asking questions first. What are you afraid of? Why are you arriving to this conclusion? How did you come to this conclusion? How did you come to think this and this and this? And what would you like to change? What would you like things to be different? Can we think together on other options than this one? I think it would be more beneficial to open conversation, even though it's very irritating because we know that they're wrong, but it really doesn't add up to anything to tell they're wrong or to make them change their mind from, black to white or opposite or, to an extreme way. So this is my thought that we should all work on more mental and intellectual flexibility with in our conversation with people we are sure they're wrong.
I agree 100%. And I think it was Corinne.
I actually think somebody else had their hand up before me, but I don't know who that was. I think they just put their hand down, but there was someone before me.
Was there someone else?
Yeah, there was, but I don't see them now. I don't know.
Go ahead.
Well, I'll go, but if you're the person who had your hand raised and you want to go, please let me know. I don't mean to cut in line from you. But I wanted to continue off of kind of what Margot was saying to some degree, and it's interesting to me because I feel like the last couple of these meetings that I've been to, even though we start with one topic, it always seems to come back to the same thing, which is this idea of I'm right, you're wrong. And I think that's really unhealthy for anyone to focus on that being right. Why does any individual feel this innate need to be right? I think if we're approaching anybody with this idea of, well, I have to prove you wrong, you have to view things from my view, I think that's really unhealthy, and that's just going to break us apart even further. So maybe rather than trying to hear someone else's view and approach it with like, oh, well, why do they see it wrong? Maybe we should go, why do I need to be right? Why is this an issue for me?
Well, I don't know when I'm talking about these things, I also think that you have a good point in that we should always have an open mind that we might be wrong when we think we're right. And I think that was brought up earlier is when we're asking thoughtful questions, we may ask questions and realize the person we're asking the questions to is better able to defend their beliefs than we are. And if they are, then we should say, wow, you taught me something here. I learned about X, Y, and Z. And so if you don't enter a conversation with the idea that you might be wrong, the other party will hone in on that. They will see that and they will feel that lack of open-mindedness. And that's why the second intention is to listen with an open mind. It doesn't mean other people listen with an open mind and we don't. It means we have to listen with an open mind too. So you're absolutely right, Corinne. Like we need to always have an open mind that we may be wrong. And that's where I say, like, if we admit we're wrong with good judgment, we're immediately right again. We just got closer to truth and we became more fair. And the only time we're ever truly wrong is when it's clear that we're wrong and we don't admit it. And so I agree with you 100%. We should always keep an open mind that we're wrong. But I would also say that um, everybody has a natural desire to seek truth. And I said that earlier. I think we all do too. And if we think we know the truth and someone else doesn't, then it's healthy for us to want to share what we believe is true. It's also healthy for them to share what they think is true. And we should expect them to do that in return. And as long as we're both following the second and third intentions, where we're sharing our beliefs transparently and listening to the other person with an open mind and using our critical thinking skills, we will, in that exchange, that thoughtful, compassionate, empathetic exchange, we will learn from each other one way or another. We'll at least learn a new perspective, even if we don't agree with them, or they'll learn a new perspective from us, even if they don't agree with it. So it is a two-way street, Corinne. And I don't think that I do think we need to look at it from that perspective. The other thing I wanted to share is our conversation on confirmation bias, which explains, hold on, Aaliyah. It explains why people have the need to be right. And in the conversation on confirmation bias, I explained why people have an inherent desire to be right, which is what confirmation bias is the desire to be right rather than admit we're wrong and then be more right.
Daddy, what does bias mean?
I'll explain that to you in a little bit, my love.
Oh, no, go ahead and answer it. That was perfect.
What's that, Carly?
I said, go ahead and answer what bias means. That was a perfect question.
It was a good question, actually. I think it's fitting of an answer, isn't it? And we don't have any hands up, so I'm going to answer your question, Aaliyah. What bias is it means that we how do I explain this to a 7-year-old? So you're almost 8, so I can get a little more complicated, right? So bias means we naturally will say one thing or another. So what confirmation bias is it means that we have our current beliefs, right? So if someone tells you something that says that you're wrong, most people will ignore their evidence that you're wrong. And what they'll do is they'll only listen to evidence that says that they're right. And so that's a bias to believe that we're right rather than admit the areas that we're wrong. So that's what a bias means. It means that that's one type of bias. It means that you're going to believe something that may not be the most true thing. And you'll have a tendency to answer something or to believe something that may not be the most likely thing to be true. And so by being aware of biases, we can actually be less likely to fall into them. And what does a bias do but make us less likely to be aligned with truth and fairness? So by being aware of the different types of bias and trying to actively combat them, then we'll be less likely to be biased and have misunderstandings. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Good.
I don't like
Now-
orange cats, but sometimes
Very
orange
precious.
cats
That was
can be
very precious.
Yeah, it was awesome.
So a teaching moment, daddy to daughter, but with a with an audience. I think this is a good time, if there are no other questions, for me to try to honor Mandy's suggestion, which is to have some closing notes. So I would argue that that we should remember that the inflation spike in the US over a 10-year period was perfectly within normal inflation levels historically for the last, hundreds of years 100+ years that we've measured it. And because it actually followed many years of below average inflation, there was a good reason for that inflation, which is a huge increase in the money supply. And I don't think that the full effects of that increase in money supply have actually trickled down, if you will, to the CPI yet. So I think we're going to see more inflation, especially because I think more currency is going to come into the money supply. And then the other thing to remember as practical advice is that when someone tells you something that makes you emotional, clarify that you understood it correctly. Ask thoughtful questions of, hey, is this what you meant? And try to make sure you understood their perspective really well. Then write down their perspective, and that now that you've understood it correctly, and then go about trying to fact check it and look for whether or not you can find objective sources that don't have their political bias, whatever political bias they may have, and look for politically independent sources that will verify that the facts that they are standing ground on are true. And if you can't find such sources, then go back to them and say, "Hey, I looked for, to see whether or not these things are true, and I couldn't find evidence. Can you point me to why you believe they're true?" Don't tell them they're wrong, because maybe they're not. Maybe they have a source you didn't find, right? And so always have an open mind and just say, "Hey, I couldn't find, a valid source that said that what, these premises that you had were true. So could you help me understand why you believe that?" And then dig in with empathy and try to understand why they believe it. So with hopefully those are good closing notes, and thank you all for coming, for your thoughtful questions, good conversation, and I appreciate everybody's time and attention. And feel free to join us on Discord. If you go to freethinkerinstitute.org, you can get to the Discord server where we chat in between these events, and you can give feedback on tonight's event. There's a whole channel for our Tuesday night events that you can continue the conversation in there. And thanks again, and I hope everyone has a good night, day, morning, depending on where you are in the world. So thank you.
And thanks to your little
Thank you,
kiddo
Garrett.
there for her great question.
Yes,
That was
thank you for your
awesome.
question.
I think your daughters are looking wiser and wiser.
They get
Yeah,
wiser every day.
awesome.
They teach me stuff some days. I didn't know that
Yeah.
dolphins could kill sharks. They taught me that.
Good night, Garrett.
That's
Thank you.
awesome.
Have a good one, everyone. Bye-bye.